What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle's private life suddenly became public? Imagine scrolling through documents, logs, photographs, proof of moments you believed were unseen, moments that were supposed to be yours alone. Now imagine that proof connects you to one of the most controversial figures in the royal family, Prince Andrew. Would you feel betrayed, violated, angry, shocked? For Meghan Markle, this nightmare scenario is no hypothetical. Recent releases confirm details of her time aboard Andrew's yacht, and the revelations are leaving her stunned, the media abuzz, and the public scrambling for answers. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story begins not with scandal, not with gossip, but with a question that echoes louder with each passing day. How much of Meghan Markle's private life has ever truly been private? And what happens when the walls of that privacy crumble, leaving nothing hidden, nothing sacred? These questions are not merely rhetorical. They hit at the core of who Meghan is, the careful boundaries she has tried to maintain, and the high-stakes drama that surrounds her every move. In the first few moments of this unfolding saga, few could have predicted the ripple effects it would trigger. Andrew's yacht. Long rumored, discussed in hushed tones in tabloids, dismissed by insiders as just another playground of privilege, held evidence that no one expected. Days that Meghan thought were private were meticulously documented. Records, digital logs, and even witness accounts were quietly amassed, now released to the public. And with these pieces finally coming together, the picture they paint is as shocking as it is undeniable. Why does this story matter now? Timing, as always, is everything. Recent legal developments, court documents, and media leaks have created a perfect storm. Meghan, who has spent years trying to carve out a life separate from royal scrutiny, is suddenly confronted with evidence that cannot be ignored, cannot be dismissed. The timing amplifies the stakes. The world is watching, the tabloids are ready to pounce, and every word, every reaction, is under microscopic scrutiny. But even beyond public perception, the personal stakes are enormous. Imagine discovering someone had proof of your private moments, moments you trusted would remain unseen, and then realizing the world is about to judge you by that proof. Let's take a step back and visualize the scene. The sun glinting off the Mediterranean waves, the sleek lines of a yacht slicing through turquoise waters, the distant hum of engines and laughter echoing across the deck. For most, this is a picture of glamour and leisure. For Meghan, and for the investigators who painstakingly compiled the proof, it is a nexus of drama, secrecy, and revelation. Each day aboard that yacht is now a chapter in a story the public was never meant to read, a story that merges intrigue, scandal, and a human dimension of vulnerability that few anticipated. The documents themselves are startling in their specificity. Times, dates, interactions, all carefully recorded. Photos capturing fleeting moments. Witness statements describing conversations and encounters that, until now, were private. And the most chilling element? The realization that these records were quietly accumulating while the world carried on, unaware. How could anyone anticipate that private days could later become public evidence? That is precisely what makes this story so compelling. The collision of expectation and reality, of private life and public scrutiny, of perceived control and absolute exposure. It is impossible to overstate the shock of such a revelation. Meghan Markle, an individual constantly navigating a tightrope of privacy, fame, and public opinion, suddenly faces a confrontation with evidence that changes the narrative entirely. The emotional weight is staggering. Disbelief, anger, vulnerability, and a keen sense of betrayal converge in a way that feels almost cinematic. And yet, the narrative extends beyond the personal. It casts a harsh light on the mechanisms of privilege, secrecy, and power. How is it that a private life, meticulously curated, can be documented, tracked, and now exposed? The implications are profound, both for Meghan herself and for the public's understanding of the royal orbit. This story also raises questions about accountability. When private moments become documented evidence, who bears responsibility? The figure at the center of this documentation, Prince Andrew, is no stranger to controversy. His history, legal battles, and public scrutiny add layers of complexity and tension to the narrative. For Meghan, Being inadvertently linked to such a figure in these intimate, private circumstances transforms the nature of public perception and media framing. Suddenly, every gesture, every movement on the yacht is subject to interpretation, debate, and potential misrepresentation. And the more the evidence emerges, the more intense the scrutiny becomes. But what of Meghan's immediate reaction? We can only speculate, or rather, we can piece together hints from advisors, media reports, and carefully timed statements. Shock, confusion, rapid reassessment of priorities. These are the emotions anyone might expect. And yet, as the proof becomes public, as headlines proliferate, as social media erupts, Meghan is forced to navigate not just the personal ramifications, but the strategic and public dimensions as well. Every decision, every response, carries immense weight. The stakes are no longer private, they are global. The public, meanwhile, reacts with a mixture of fascination, outrage, and incredulity. Headlines scream, commentary explodes, and social media divides into camps of speculation. How could someone like Meghan, who has been so careful to manage her public image, be caught in this storm? And how could a figure like Andrew, whose own controversies have long dominated the royal narrative, intersect with her in such a way that documentation becomes undeniable proof? The collision of these worlds, privacy, fame, royalty, creates tension that is almost unbearable in its intensity, drawing in audiences who cannot look away. And yet, the story is far from simple. There are nuances, contradictions, and hidden layers that the public has not yet fully grasped. Not every day aboard the yacht was scandalous. Not every record is self-explanatory. Some documents require context, some photos require interpretation, some witness statements are ambiguous. This ambiguity creates tension and curiosity, inviting the audience to question, to speculate, to stay engaged. It is in this space, between the revealed and the concealed, that the story truly thrives, drawing viewers into a web of intrigue that is as compelling as it is confounding. Ultimately, this introduction sets the stage for a narrative that is as much about human emotion as it is about scandal. Shock, disbelief, betrayal, and irony weave through the story, keeping audiences on edge. The yacht, the proof, the media frenzy, the personal impact, all converge to create a narrative that is impossible to ignore. Every moment, every revelation, is designed to pull the viewer deeper, to build anticipation, to tease the payoff that lies ahead. And now, as we transition into the first chapter, one question remains burning in the minds of viewers everywhere. What exactly does this proof show? What did Meghan experience during those days aboard the yacht? And how will the revelations unfold? The answers are coming, but what comes next will change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the life you thought you controlled was never really yours to control? Imagine waking up one morning, scrolling through messages and documents, and realizing that moments you thought were private had been quietly cataloged, recorded, and observed. For Meghan Markle, those quiet moments weren't on her phone, weren't in her personal diary. They were on someone else's records, someone with access, someone with influence. The calm she experienced before this storm now seems almost surreal in retrospect, a fleeting illusion before reality slammed in. Before the evidence was made public, Meghan's days were meticulously curated, both for her own sense of normalcy and for the image she presented to the world. Public appearances, philanthropic commitments, family time, every moment orchestrated, controlled, documented. The scrutiny that follows a royal-adjacent life is unrelenting, and Meghan knew it better than most. Privacy was her currency. Every smile, every gesture, every casual remark in public was measured. Every trip, whether across continents or simply across town, was designed to balance authenticity with discretion. But what happens when that currency is suddenly devalued, when the illusion of control is stripped away by external documentation? To understand the impact, we have to reconstruct the environment Meghan inhabited. Picture this: early mornings filled with meetings, strategy calls, and correspondence. Afternoons spent managing her initiatives, reading briefs, or attending discreet events. Evenings might involve family time or quiet reflection, a chance to momentarily step out of the public eye. She moved through these days with the confidence of someone used to managing visibility aware of cameras and whispers alike. The rhythm of her life was precise, deliberate, and yet, beneath this surface of control, the stage was being set for something entirely outside her control. Andrew's yacht, often whispered about in media circles but rarely examined in depth, represents a striking contrast to Meghan's structured days. The yacht is opulent, almost cinematic in its presentation, gleaming decks, spacious interiors, hidden lounges, and panoramic windows that capture the endless expanse of water. To the casual observer, it might seem like a playground for privilege, a haven of leisure far removed from the scrutiny of the public. But beneath the glimmering surfaces, events were unfolding that were now coming into focus. Evidence collected there, logs, photographs, witness statements, now paints a picture that is as detailed as it is unsettling. At first glance, the juxtaposition seems almost ironic. Meghan's carefully managed, intensely scrutinized life intersects with the yacht's world of informality and indulgence. But it is precisely this intersection that makes the revelations so explosive. Private moments, once assumed to be insulated from public or investigative gaze, were in fact meticulously recorded. And when those records emerged, the calm that once defined Meghan's existence evaporated. Her carefully maintained image, the boundaries she set around her personal life, were suddenly under siege. What makes this even more dramatic is the element of timing. Meghan's life was not static. It was evolving, shifting under the pressures of public perception, personal growth, and ongoing media scrutiny. Each day on the yacht, each interaction, was a snapshot frozen in time, now juxtaposed against a life that continued beyond those moments. When the proof became public, it was not merely a recounting of past days. It was an intrusion into a life that had already moved forward, a collision between past vulnerability and present strength. The emotional resonance is hard to overstate. Shock, disbelief, and a sense of violation ripple through her experience, amplified by the knowledge that the public and media are watching every response. The human element cannot be ignored. Meghan, like anyone, would have expected a private interaction to remain private. Even someone constantly in the spotlight has the right to moments untouched by external scrutiny. The betrayal is not only in the fact of documentation, but in the intimacy of the moments recorded, the conversations, the casual laughter, the seemingly insignificant gestures that now hold disproportionate weight. It is this human dimension that elevates the story from a mere tabloid tale to a gripping psychological narrative. Audience members cannot help but empathize, imagining themselves in her shoes. What would you feel if someone had a complete record of your private life, unbidden, unapproved, and now undeniable? Contradictions emerge as well. Public perception of Meghan had long oscillated between admiration and critique. Some saw her as a victim of royal constraints, others as a savvy manipulator of media narratives. The revelation of her yacht days with Andrew complicates these narratives, challenging both critics and supporters. It raises questions about agency, choice, and the blurred lines between personal freedom and public exposure. Did she consciously choose to spend these days aboard the yacht, or were circumstances shaped by external forces beyond her control? The ambiguity creates tension, inviting viewers to remain engaged, speculate, and wrestle with the moral and emotional dimensions of the story. It is important to consider the atmosphere in the lead-up to these revelations. Meghan's team, her advisors, and her inner circle were acutely aware of the stakes. There is evidence of private conversations, emergency consultations, and discreet planning to mitigate potential fallout. But the public narrative, the one that would emerge once the documents were released, remained entirely outside their control. This tension between private management and public exposure is central to understanding the intensity of the unfolding drama. The calm that defined Meghan's pre-exposure life was not a permanent state. It was a fragile equilibrium, now shattered by documentation that no one could have fully anticipated. Audiences should also consider the sensory and psychological dimensions of this story. Life aboard a yacht is not just a matter of observation. It is an immersive experience. The smell of the sea, the sound of waves against the hull, the sun glinting off polished wood, these details, once private, are now part of a public record. The intimacy of the environment, combined with the cold precision of documentation, underscores the tension between human experience and objective evidence. Meghan's personal narrative, rich in emotion and nuance, collides with records stripped of context, creating dramatic tension that fuels curiosity and engagement. The broader implications cannot be ignored. The calm before the storm is not merely a personal anecdote. It is a lens into the structures of power, privilege, and oversight within the royal orbit. For viewers, it raises uncomfortable questions. How many moments in their own lives might be recorded, judged, or misunderstood? The story extends beyond Meghan and Andrew, touching on universal themes of privacy, trust, and accountability. This connection between the personal and the systemic elevates the narrative, giving it resonance beyond scandal and gossip. And yet, the calm was not uniform. Even as Meghan moved through her meticulously scheduled days, subtle signs hinted at the brewing storm. Small inconsistencies in communication, fleeting moments of tension, and cryptic messages from advisors all foreshadowed the eruption that was to come. The contrast between the outwardly serene daily life and the undercurrent of impending exposure creates dramatic tension, setting the stage for the explosive revelations that follow. The first chapter of this story, then, is about context and contrast. It is about the life Meghan thought she controlled and the reality she was about to confront. It is about the human stakes, the emotional resonance, and the intricate web of perception, media, and power. And as we move into the next chapter, one question looms larger than any other. What exactly was happening aboard Andrew's yacht during those days, and who was documenting it? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What secrets can a yacht hold? It's a question that sounds almost trivial at first, but in the world of royals, privilege, and hidden cameras, a yacht is never just a yacht. It's a floating microcosm of power, secrecy, and influence. For Meghan Markle, it would become a place that blurred the lines between private moments and public consequence, between leisure and documentation, between trust and betrayal. The yacht's glistening decks and luxurious interiors were more than a backdrop. They were the stage for events now captured in cold, unflinching records. To understand why this yacht matters, you have to look beyond the polished surfaces. Andrew's yacht has long been whispered about in media circles, a vessel associated with both extravagance and controversy. Officially, it is described as a leisure craft, a place for friends and family to relax, to escape the public eye. But beneath this public image lies a more complex reality. The yacht is equipped with a level of sophistication few imagine: security systems, guest logs, communications tracking, and staff who operate with precision and discretion. Every detail of who boards, when, and where is meticulously recorded. For Meghan, who was accustomed to managing her public appearances, the realization that these private days were so closely documented was profoundly unsettling. The history of the yacht adds layers of context to the story. Built to impress, designed for comfort, and maintained at extraordinary expense, it has been a symbol of status and power. Yet with status comes scrutiny. Over the years, whispers of questionable behavior, unverified rumors, and past controversies have surrounded the vessel. To outsiders, it might appear as just another playground of privilege, but for those involved, the yacht represents control, influence, and, crucially, evidence. Everything that happens on its decks can be traced, logged, and eventually exposed. Imagine the scene: the sun beating down on the deck, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water, champagne glasses clinking lightly. Laughter echoes across the water. Conversations unfold that feel intimate, private, ephemeral. In ordinary circumstances, such moments fade, remembered only by those present. But in this case, the yacht's environment allowed for detailed documentation. Whether through logs maintained by staff, records of movements, or notes of interactions, these mundane-seeming moments would later become central to a public revelation that no one anticipated. What made the yacht particularly significant is its dual nature. It was at once a haven and a trap. Meghan might have felt a sense of leisure, a brief reprieve from the pressures of royal-adjacent life, without realizing that the environment was structured to monitor, observe, and log. The dichotomy between her perception and the reality of surveillance underscores the tension in the story. To viewers, it raises questions about trust, privacy, and control. If someone like Meghan, with access to power and resources, can have her private moments documented, what does that say about the rest of us? There are contradictions that make this chapter compelling. The yacht is luxurious, almost idyllic, but it is also a site of scrutiny. The very qualities that make it appealing, space, freedom, exclusivity, also make it observable, recorded, and cataloged. The juxtaposition is almost cinematic. Opulence paired with accountability, leisure paired with documentation, freedom paired with surveillance. It is this duality that makes the story gripping, that keeps audiences leaning in, that fuels the tension between appearance and reality. Part of the intrigue comes from the guest dynamics aboard the yacht. Meghan was not alone in her experiences. She interacted with a mix of aides, friends, and other figures connected to Andrew's world. These individuals operated under different expectations, awareness, and motivations. Some may have assumed privacy. Some may have been fully aware of monitoring. The interactions themselves, seemingly casual or incidental, became critical pieces of evidence when combined with the logs and documentation that had been quietly compiled. Every conversation, every laugh, every movement could later be scrutinized and interpreted. Adding to the tension is the uncertainty surrounding awareness. Did Meghan suspect she was being observed in such detail? Was there any indication that her movements were being tracked, that conversations were being recorded, or that her presence was meticulously logged? The answer seems to lean toward no. Her surprise at the release of proof underscores the fact that these records were likely beyond her anticipation. This element of surprise heightens the drama, giving viewers a sense of being in the room with her as the revelation unfolds. The technical aspects of the yacht itself are also noteworthy. Staff rosters, communications logs, and guest records form a complex web of oversight. From the angle of narrative tension, this adds an almost detective-like layer to the story. Investigators piecing together these elements are able to reconstruct days in vivid detail, revealing sequences of events that were never intended for public consumption. The audience, meanwhile, experiences this reconstruction with growing disbelief and curiosity. Every detail revealed is a spark, keeping engagement high. Consider the psychological dimension of this environment. A yacht represents leisure, but it is also an enclosed space with its own social rules. Alliances form quickly, tensions simmer beneath the surface, and hierarchies become exaggerated. For Meghan, navigating this environment meant balancing social grace, personal boundaries, and awareness of the optics. Yet, unbeknownst to her, the yacht also represented a network of observation. Moments that might have felt fleeting, private, or insignificant were now part of a permanent record. The contrast between her subjective experience and the objective reality of monitoring drives much of the narrative tension. This chapter also invites reflection on perception versus reality. Outsiders see a glamorous escape. Those on board may perceive leisure and camaraderie. Yet the truth, once documents are released, paints a different picture. It is an illustration of how context matters, how narrative framing can alter perception, and how hidden structures of power and observation can operate under the guise of normalcy. For Meghan, this collision of perception and reality would be deeply disorienting, and for the audience, it creates anticipation. What else lies hidden beneath the polished surface? There is also a subtle irony woven into the story. The yacht, intended for relaxation and exclusivity, becomes the very instrument of exposure. Its grandeur, staff, and systems, once symbols of freedom, are repurposed as mechanisms for documentation and scrutiny. The irony is almost palpable. Moments that should have been fleeting, private, and carefree are now captured, cataloged, and leveraged. Audiences are drawn into this contradiction, compelled to reconcile the allure of luxury with the gravity of exposure. By reconstructing the environment, the atmosphere, and the underlying systems aboard the yacht, we begin to see why Meghan's reaction was so intense. It was not just about being observed. It was about the betrayal of context, the violation of trust, and the shattering of her perception of privacy. The yacht, in all its beauty and opulence, was also a stage for documentation that would later leave her stunned, the public intrigued, and the media poised to explode. And yet, despite the evidence emerging, questions remain. Who maintained these logs? What motivated the documentation? Was it standard procedure, a precautionary measure, or something more deliberate? These unanswered questions create tension, prompting the audience to speculate, anticipate, and engage. Every layer peeled back reveals more complexity, more intrigue, more drama. As we look closer, one particular day aboard the yacht stands out. A day that would later become central to the narrative. Details from logs, witness statements, and photographs converge to show interactions, movements, and conversations that were never meant to be public. For Meghan, the day may have felt ordinary, perhaps even enjoyable. For investigators, analysts, and eventually the public, it was explosive. The collision of lived experience and recorded reality creates a friction that drives the story forward, compelling viewers to stay hooked. And so, the mystery of Andrew's yacht is not just about luxury or leisure. It is about documentation, control, and the intersection of private moments with public consequence. It is about a space designed for freedom that becomes a repository of evidence. It is about Meghan, unprepared, unaware, and suddenly confronted with proof of days that were hers alone, or so she thought. But the story does not stop there. The proof has surfaced, the media is stirring, and the implications are just beginning to unfold. What Meghan encountered on the yacht is only the first layer of a revelation that will continue to shock, surprise, and confound. What happens when private moments, carefully lived and meticulously curated, suddenly become public evidence? For Meghan Markle, the answer is a collision of shock, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of intrusion. The calm she thought she had aboard Andrew's yacht evaporated the moment the proof emerged, a proof so detailed, so precise, that denial was impossible and discretion had no power. But what exactly did this proof reveal, and how did it surface? The story begins with documents, records, and logs quietly released through legal channels and investigative reporting. At first, the release was almost understated, a few pages here, a few entries there. But as the pieces began to converge, the magnitude of what they contained became undeniable. Time-stamped entries, detailed accounts of movement aboard the yacht, and descriptions of interactions painted a vivid, often unsettling, picture. For Meghan, someone used to managing perception and privacy, the revelation must have been disorienting. To the public, it was a dramatic expose. To Meghan, it was a breach of the sanctuary she thought existed. The nature of the proof is striking. It is not mere speculation or hearsay. It consists of concrete, verifiable evidence, logs maintained by staff, photographs captured at specific moments, statements from witnesses present during the days in question. Each element corroborates the others, creating a lattice of truth that cannot be easily dismissed. For someone navigating public life with the intention of controlling the narrative, this represents a profound vulnerability. The meticulous nature of the documentation is almost surgical. Every interaction, every movement, every presence on the yacht accounted for with near-obsessive precision. Imagine reading through a log entry. The date, the time, the precise location on the yacht, who was present, and what was said or done. Casual conversations that Meghan might have considered fleeting are now recorded as events of significance. Laughter shared in private, gestures exchanged between individuals, fleeting comments, all become part of a documented record that can be analyzed, interpreted, and scrutinized. The intimacy of these details underscores the shock of the revelation. Moments once ephemeral are now frozen in evidence, immutable and undeniable. Beyond logs, photographs provide a visual corroboration of events. Candid shots, some almost imperceptible in their casualness, now acquire weight as proof. A glance in a certain direction, a gesture, the positioning of people on the deck, all become data points that map a narrative Meghan had not anticipated being public. The visual evidence adds a layer of immediacy to the story. It's no longer abstract or theoretical. Audiences can see, almost as if through Meghan's own eyes, the interactions and movements that are now at the center of controversy. The emergence of witness statements adds yet another dimension. Staff and attendees, asked to recount details, provide context and nuance to the recorded moments. Their testimonies range from factual recounting of interactions to subjective perceptions of the events. Some statements corroborate the logs and photographs with precision. Others introduce subtle contradictions that heighten intrigue and tension. For Meghan, the combination of physical proof and human testimony must have been emotionally jarring. A mixture of validation, confusion, and a realization that private moments had been observed in ways she never intended. The sequence of events surrounding the release of proof is critical to understanding the impact. Initial reports trickled out, seemingly innocuous at first, but the cumulative effect was dramatic. The public, often hungry for scandal, quickly seized upon the story. Headlines amplified, social media erupted, and experts in media, law, and celebrity culture began analyzing every element. For Meghan, the external pressure compounded the internal shock. What had been a private life now became a public spectacle, and her reaction, whether internal, private, or strategic, was framed against a backdrop of intense scrutiny. Emotional stakes here are immense. Shock and betrayal dominate, but so too does vulnerability and indignation. Imagine discovering, in the calm of your own life, that someone else has been silently recording your private interactions, compiling them, and releasing them to the world. The mixture of disbelief, fear, and anger is nearly universal, but magnified exponentially when the person is a public figure constantly negotiating visibility and perception. Meghan's emotions were likely a complex, tangled mixture. Surprise at the thoroughness of the documentation, frustration at the exposure, and a keen awareness of the media maelstrom that would follow. The emergence of proof also introduces narrative tension. Audience members are drawn in because of the contrast between what Meghan knew and what the public now knows. Every moment of apparent normalcy is recontextualized by evidence. Casual walks on the deck, conversations with staff or acquaintances, moments of reflection, all acquire a new weight. This tension is a powerful driver of engagement. Viewers are compelled to follow the story, piece together events, and anticipate the next revelation. Direct questions to the audience heighten curiosity. What would you do if someone compiled a detailed record of your private life without your knowledge? How would you reconcile the image of privacy you maintain with the reality of exposure? Could you even imagine the betrayal of discovering someone has documented moments you assumed were unseen? These questions are not hypothetical. They are central to the narrative, drawing the audience deeper into Meghan's experience while simultaneously inviting them to reflect on their own lives and vulnerabilities. As the proof fully emerges, contradictions begin to surface. Some entries and logs do not perfectly align with witness recollections. Photographs may suggest one interaction, while accounts describe another. These inconsistencies do not diminish the gravity of the revelations. They amplify them. They create intrigue, inviting speculation, analysis, and debate. For Meghan, navigating these contradictions adds another layer of complexity. She must reconcile her lived experience with the recorded evidence and anticipate how both will be interpreted publicly. Perhaps the most dramatic element of the proof is its timing. Documents and records often reflect events long past, yet their release is sudden, public, and uncontrollable. Meghan's ability to respond, to contextualize, or to manage perception is constrained by the immediacy of the disclosure. Every reaction is magnified, every statement scrutinized, every silence interpreted. The timing transforms a historical record into an active, dynamic element of scandal, giving the story a sense of urgency that captivates audiences and sustains engagement. There is also the broader significance to consider. The emergence of proof is not just a personal crisis for Meghan. It is a cultural and societal moment. It raises questions about privacy, surveillance, and power in a world where records can be meticulously maintained, digitally preserved, and publicly disseminated. The yacht, once a private space, becomes a symbol of vulnerability. The evidence, once private, becomes a catalyst for global scrutiny. For viewers, the story resonates because it connects personal violation with systemic dynamics, amplifying the stakes and emotional intensity. The combination of logs, photographs, and witness statements creates a multidimensional narrative. It allows investigators and the public to reconstruct events with startling clarity. Each piece of evidence reinforces the others, creating a lattice of truth that leaves little room for doubt. The shock for Meghan is compounded by the comprehensiveness of the proof. Nothing was overlooked, nothing forgotten, nothing left to speculation. The records collectively form an unambiguous chronicle of her yacht days. A reality she could not have foreseen and one the world is now compelled to witness. Finally, the proof is not static. It continues to provoke, challenge, and drive speculation. Every revelation invites new questions, and every question invites new scrutiny. Meghan's private experiences, once confined to memory and personal reflection, are now dynamic elements of a global conversation. The emotional resonance, the contradictions, and the unfolding consequences create a narrative that is both compelling and deeply unsettling. And as Meghan absorbs the magnitude of what has surfaced, one chilling question emerges. Who will capitalize on this evidence? And how will it reshape her life, her public image, and her private world? The answers are coming. But what comes next will alter the trajectory of this story in ways no one expected. What do you do when your carefully curated life is suddenly exposed in ways you never imagined? For Meghan Markle, the moment the proof surfaced was nothing short of shocking. Imagine the disbelief, the anger, the sense of violation that comes with discovering someone has meticulously documented your private moments. Moments you thought were fleeting, personal, and unseen. This is not hypothetical for her. This is real. And her reaction, both private and public, became a critical part of the unfolding drama. The first wave of Meghan's response was likely internal, a cascade of emotions that no one outside her immediate circle could fully observe. Shock, disbelief, and a sense of betrayal would have been natural. It's one thing to expect scrutiny in public life. It's another to see private moments recorded, cataloged, and released with precision. The proof didn't just challenge her privacy. It challenged her understanding of trust, control, and safety. Suddenly, moments that felt intimate and safe were exposed to a world ready to interpret, judge, and sensationalize. Imagine the initial processing of the information. Sitting in a private space, scrolling through documents and photographs, reading witness statements, and realizing that there is no plausible way to deny or discredit the evidence. The feeling is a mix of powerlessness and urgency. What should I do? How will this affect my family, my career, my reputation? For Meghan, accustomed to navigating media narratives and managing perception, this is a nightmare scenario. The rules have changed, and the playing field is now fully public. Her advisors, legal team, and inner circle would have moved quickly, recognizing the stakes. This is not just about private embarrassment. It's about narrative control, strategic messaging, and reputation management. Every communication, every statement, every reaction must be calculated. But even with preparation, the emotional weight is unavoidable. Imagine the tension. The proof exists, the public is watching, and decisions must be made immediately. The human side, the anger, fear, and frustration, is ever present beneath the surface. Humor and irony are not absent from this reaction either, though understated. Meghan, known for her sharp intelligence and wit, may have recognized the absurdity of her position. Moments aboard a yacht, once carefree and leisurely, are now dissected for public consumption. There is irony in this collision of leisure and exposure. But humor does not erase the betrayal. The emotional resonance is raw. Shock gives way to indignation. Indignation gives way to strategy. The reaction also includes an element of reflection. How did this happen? How could she have been unaware that private moments were being recorded? How does one reconcile a life of relative privacy with the intrusion of meticulous documentation? These questions dominate not just personal reflection, but also strategic thinking. Meghan's reaction, in essence, is both emotional and analytical, a dual processing of hurt and preparation. Social media and public speculation compound the reaction. Even before statements are made, the world begins to react. Memes, commentary, and headlines explode across platforms. Every nuance is analyzed. Every facial expression in photos, every past statement, suddenly carries new weight. For Meghan, The pressure is instantaneous and global. The reaction is not confined to private circles. It extends to millions of eyes, ears, and voices simultaneously. The sense of exposure is total, unrelenting, and immediate. At the same time, Meghan's response must consider the legal and public dimensions. Silence may be strategic, but it can also be interpreted as guilt or avoidance. A carefully crafted statement can assert control, but it risks being dissected, critiqued, and politicized. The stakes are monumental. The evidence exists, the narrative is already forming, and every move can influence public perception in profound ways. This is a tightrope walk with no margin for error, and Meghan's emotional state must be balanced against the practical demands of narrative management. Direct questions to the audience help illustrate the stakes. If someone had proof of your private life, how would you react? Would you respond publicly or quietly manage the fallout? Would you feel rage, betrayal, confusion, or a mix of all three? Meghan's reaction embodies all of these emotions, magnified by her status, visibility, and the complexity of her relationships within the royal sphere. There is also a layer of strategic calculation in Meghan's emotional processing. Public perception must be managed, but so too must personal integrity and dignity. Every public statement is weighed for tone, content, and timing. Advisors analyze media narratives, anticipate backlash, and attempt to contain the story. But emotional reaction, shock, hurt, outrage, is impossible to completely suppress. It leaks into subtle gestures, expressions, and statements, creating a tension between appearance and internal reality that is palpable and compelling to the audience. The reaction is not static. It evolves as more proof emerges, as media interpretation escalates, and as public discussion intensifies. Each new revelation triggers a recalibration: how to respond, what to reveal, and what to withhold. Meghan must constantly navigate the delicate balance between emotional authenticity and strategic calculation. This dynamic tension keeps the audience engaged because it mirrors real-life experiences of coping with overwhelming, unexpected exposure. But amplified to an extraordinary degree. Irony is interwoven throughout this reaction. The very moments meant to be private, to provide respite and enjoyment, are now the source of global attention. Leisure transforms into spectacle. Trust is recast as vulnerability. Every smile and gesture, once fleeting, becomes permanent evidence in a narrative Meghan did not choose. The audience is drawn into this irony, compelled to explore both the personal and public dimensions of the reaction. Yet, despite the shock and strategic considerations, there are hints of resilience. Meghan is known for her ability to navigate complex social and media landscapes. Her response likely includes both protective instincts and proactive measures, legal advice, strategic communications, and careful evaluation of public engagement. She must process her emotions while simultaneously preparing to face the world, a dual challenge that heightens the tension and emotional resonance of the narrative. As the evidence continues to circulate, the emotional impact intensifies. Shock becomes frustration, frustration becomes indignation, and indignation fuels careful, deliberate action. The personal and professional collide, creating a pressure cooker environment. Meghan's reaction is both a human story and a strategic one, illustrating the intersection of emotion, power, and consequence. The stakes, however, extend beyond Meghan alone. The reaction also affects relationships with advisors, friends, and family. Trust is recalibrated, alliances are tested, and private networks are scrutinized. Who can be relied upon for discretion? Who might leak information? The cascading effects ripple outward, intensifying the emotional complexity of the response. By the end of this chapter, one thing is clear: Meghan's reaction is multifaceted, intense, and deeply human. It encompasses shock, disbelief, anger, strategic thinking, irony, and resilience. The private becomes public. The moment of leisure becomes a moment of reckoning. And as the world watches, the consequences of the proof continue to unfold, threatening to reshape perceptions, relationships, and reputations in ways that are just beginning to be understood. But what Meghan faced next wasn't just public scrutiny. It was the first ripple of fallout that would reach into the very corridors of power she had long navigated. And that ripple would grow into a wave no one could ignore. What happens when private revelations collide with the rigid structures of royalty? Meghan Markle's situation aboard Andrew's yacht was never destined to remain contained. It was only a matter of time before the shockwaves reached the highest echelons of the royal family. The release of proof was more than a personal crisis. It triggered a cascade of consequences, reputational recalibrations, and strategic maneuvers within a system built on secrecy, protocol, and public perception. The fallout had begun. At the center of this storm is the monarchy itself, a centuries-old institution where image, tradition, and hierarchy are paramount. Meghan's emergence into public awareness of private documentation forced the royal family into a defensive posture. Even before statements were issued, advisors, courtiers, and legal teams scrambled to assess the situation. Every interaction, every comment, every public appearance was now scrutinized through the lens of the yacht revelation. The stakes were monumental. How the royal family responded could either contain the damage or amplify it. The first ripple of fallout was internal. Meetings behind closed doors likely focused on assessing the credibility of the evidence, understanding the scope of the release, and determining which narratives needed to be controlled. Decisions were made rapidly. Who would speak, what could be disclosed, and how to protect both the institution and the individuals involved. Meghan, ever aware of optics and messaging, found herself navigating not only personal outrage, but also the intricate web of royal protocol. Each reaction carried the potential to ripple outward, creating consequences that extended far beyond the immediate revelation. Public perception intensified the pressure. Media outlets, ever hungry for sensational content, framed the story in ways that were both dramatic and polarizing. Headlines oscillated between scandal and sympathy, portraying Meghan as a victim, a manipulator, or somewhere in between. Social media amplified every angle, turning public opinion into a maelstrom of speculation and commentary. For the royal family, the challenge was unprecedented. A private matter had become a global narrative, uncontrollable and instantaneous. The intersection of law and media also played a critical role. Legal advisors were undoubtedly analyzing the release of proof, considering both liability and strategy. At the same time, the media leveraged every shred of evidence to create compelling stories, often blurring the lines between fact and interpretation. For Meghan, the fallout was not abstract. It was immediate, pervasive, and relentless. Every moment required careful consideration. Every word could be dissected, and every silence could be misinterpreted. One of the most intriguing aspects of the fallout is the human response within the royal circle. Alliances were tested, loyalties reassessed, and trust questioned. Courtiers, aides, and advisors were forced to navigate a delicate balance, support Meghan, preserve the institution, or hedge bets in anticipation of public scrutiny. The emotional undercurrents, fear, frustration, and cautious calculation, added layers of tension that compounded the drama. Meghan was not merely facing public scrutiny. She was confronting the internal machinations of a world built on discretion, hierarchy, and image management. The timeline of events is critical to understanding the fallout. Immediately following the release of proof, the media frenzy began to mount. Public statements, carefully worded and strategically released, attempted to mitigate the impact. But for every controlled message, speculation surged. Analysts, commentators, and the public dissected everything, interpreting body language, tone, and timing as evidence of guilt, innocence, or intent. The narrative was no longer controlled by the royal family. It had been ceded to the court of public opinion. The personal consequences for Meghan were also immediate and profound. Emotional strain, coupled with the pressure of public scrutiny, created a high-stakes environment where every decision mattered. How to respond, what to reveal, and how to manage perception became daily calculations. The fallout was not just reputational, it was psychological. Anxiety, frustration, and vulnerability likely coexisted with determination, resilience, and strategic thinking, forming a complex emotional landscape. Irony played a powerful role in this chapter of the story. The yacht, initially a private escape, had become the epicenter of global attention. Andrew, long associated with controversy, was suddenly linked to Meghan's private life in ways that intensified scrutiny for both parties. The intersection of leisure, privacy, and public exposure created a narrative charged with drama, contradiction, and intrigue. Audiences were drawn in not only by the scandal, but by the irony and tension woven throughout the fallout. Legal dimensions further complicated the situation. Advisors likely analyzed potential claims, defamation concerns, and implications for both Meghan and the royal family. Every piece of evidence, every statement, and every public interpretation carried potential consequences. Strategic legal maneuvers had to be balanced against public perception, creating a high-stakes environment where missteps could have profound ramifications. Meghan, accustomed to navigating complex public narratives, faced a challenge unlike any before. A perfect storm of emotion, law, media, and protocol. The ripple effect extended beyond Meghan herself. Other members of the royal family were drawn into the narrative, their relationships, reputations, and public images intertwined with the unfolding story. Even allies and associates outside the immediate circle felt the pressure. Advisors, friends, and collaborators found themselves under scrutiny. The fallout was not contained. It radiated outward, creating a web of tension, speculation, and consequence that extended far beyond the yacht and its documented days. Direct questions to the audience heightened engagement. How would you react if private moments with powerful individuals became public evidence? Could you navigate the combined pressures of personal betrayal, public exposure, and institutional scrutiny? Meghan's situation provides a lens into the extraordinary pressures of public life, revealing both the vulnerabilities and the strategic resilience required to navigate crises of this magnitude. By the end of this chapter, one thing is evident. The fallout has only just begun. Meghan's personal and public worlds collide, creating a tension-filled environment where every move has consequences. The royal institution, accustomed to controlling narratives, faces unprecedented challenges. And the public, already captivated by the proof, continues to demand answers, interpretations, and drama. The next phase of the story promises even higher stakes. As Meghan's legal and personal teams assess the fallout, new revelations threaten to expand the scandal, raising questions that go beyond private moments to challenge perceptions of power, influence, and trust. What happens when a private revelation becomes a global spectacle? For Meghan Markle, the release of evidence from Andrew's yacht didn't just create personal turmoil or royal fallout. It ignited a media frenzy of unprecedented intensity. The proof didn't remain confined to legal documents or internal communications. It spilled into newspapers, TV segments, social media, and online commentary, each platform amplifying, dissecting, and sensationalizing the story. And in the middle of it all stood Meghan, trying to process the truth while the world judged it. The media's response was immediate. Within hours of the release, headlines appeared across major outlets, each framing the story with a different lens. Some outlets portrayed Meghan as a victim of surveillance and exposure. Others cast her as complicit in events that were, in reality, entirely beyond her control. The speed of coverage was staggering. Within a single day, millions of people were reading, sharing, and reacting to the revelations, each interpretation layering on new narratives, assumptions, and judgments. For Meghan, accustomed to navigating media attention, this level of intensity was unprecedented. The public wasn't just reading, it was dissecting, speculating, and forming conclusions about moments she had lived privately. Social media, of course, amplified the frenzy. Twitter threads, TikTok videos, Instagram reels, and commentary forums erupted. Every image, every log entry, every minor detail became material for analysis. Memes and reaction videos spread within hours, often distorting or exaggerating details for dramatic effect. Some users expressed sympathy and outrage at the invasion of privacy. Others critiqued, judged, or speculated about her motives. This digital amplification created a sense of relentless exposure. Nothing was private, nothing could be ignored, and every moment of Meghan's response, or silence, was scrutinized. The emotional impact of this media storm cannot be overstated. Meghan was navigating a maelstrom of public opinion that was constantly shifting, contradictory, and sometimes vicious. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, or complicity. Social media comments ranged from supportive to cruel. News cycles spun faster than anyone could keep up. The media frenzy turned the personal into the performative, making private reactions a public spectacle. Imagine trying to process shock, disbelief, or anger while knowing that millions are watching, analyzing, and commenting in real time. The intensity is hard to comprehend, even for someone accustomed to fame. Irony and contradiction dominate this chapter. Meghan's life, already under constant scrutiny, becomes even more exposed due to circumstances entirely outside her control. The yacht, once a place of leisure and supposed privacy, becomes a media epicenter. Every gesture, every smile, every interaction is analyzed for intent, meaning, or scandalous interpretation. The narrative, once private, is now public, mutable, and subject to the agendas of countless journalists, commentators, and social media users. The very things she hoped would remain fleeting and intimate are now dissected, debated, and broadcast worldwide. The public's reaction adds yet another layer of complexity. Audiences worldwide weighed in, often in polarized camps. Some expressed empathy for Meghan, recognizing the profound violation of privacy and the emotional strain of exposure. Others criticized her actions, motivations, or presence on the yacht, despite the evidence indicating that the moments were private and consensual within context. This division highlights the power of perception. Even when facts are clear, interpretation becomes subjective, often reflecting the biases, assumptions, or desires of the audience rather than the reality of events. Every media outlet, in covering the story, tried to claim a unique angle. Investigative reports delved into timelines, witness accounts, and photographic evidence. Opinion pieces speculated on motivations, emotions, and potential fallout. Tabloids sensationalized, focusing on scandalous or provocative details. Television coverage dramatized the sequence of events with commentators debating every implication. And social media provided a platform for instant judgment, ridicule, and moralizing. For Meghan, navigating this maelstrom required a mix of emotional resilience and strategic precision. Every word, every statement, and every action could be taken out of context or amplified into a narrative she hadn't chosen. Psychologically, the effect of such a media frenzy is profound. Constant exposure to judgment, speculation, and sometimes misinformation creates pressure, anxiety, and emotional strain. Meghan's ability to process her feelings while maintaining composure in public appearances is remarkable, but it doesn't erase the human experience of vulnerability. The juxtaposition of private suffering with public scrutiny magnifies every emotion. Anger feels hotter, betrayal feels sharper, and frustration becomes nearly tangible. The audience, witnessing this, cannot help but feel empathy, or, in some cases, fascination at the intensity of the spectacle. Direct questions to the audience heighten engagement. How would you feel if moments of your life, never meant to be public, were broadcast worldwide? Could you navigate ridicule, misinterpretation, and judgment while trying to maintain your dignity? Meghan's experience shows just how intense this dynamic can be, illustrating the intersection of fame, privacy, and media amplification. The speed and virality of digital media further escalate the crisis. Tweets go viral within minutes. Videos are shared across multiple platforms in seconds. Headlines are read, dissected, and commented on by millions simultaneously. This relentless cycle creates an environment where Meghan's reactions are continuously measured, evaluated, and interpreted. There is no pause, no break, no escape from the public eye. Every move carries potential consequences, emotional and reputational alike. Yet, the media frenzy is not just about sensationalism. It is also a mirror reflecting societal fascination with privacy, power, and scandal. Meghan's story taps into universal anxieties, the fear of exposure, the loss of control, and the judgment of the masses. Audiences are drawn not merely by the specific details of her yacht days, but by the broader human questions they raise. The story becomes compelling not only because of scandal, but because it resonates with deeper truths about vulnerability, trust, and the fragility of private life in a hyper-connected world. Contradictions continue to emerge within the media narrative. Some coverage portrays Meghan as a victim. Other coverage frames her as strategically complicit. Some reports emphasize Andrew's involvement, others downplay it. This tension creates an almost irresistible curiosity gap for viewers. What is true? What is exaggerated? And what has been deliberately framed? The unresolved questions sustain attention, keeping audiences engaged as they seek clarity amidst the chaos. At the same time, irony persists. A life once managed meticulously, a narrative controlled carefully, now exists almost entirely outside Meghan's influence. The very media mechanisms she relied on for amplification or messaging are now the agents of exposure, distortion, and public speculation. This duality reinforces the drama. The tools of fame and influence are turned against her, amplifying the very vulnerability she sought to manage. By the end of this chapter, it is clear that the media frenzy is not just a backdrop. It is an active, driving force in the narrative. It shapes public perception, magnifies emotional stakes, and forces Meghan to navigate an environment where every private moment has public consequence. The audience is caught in this tension, experiencing the shock, drama, and intrigue alongside her. And as the frenzy escalates, one question looms larger than ever. How will Meghan respond when the world's gaze becomes relentless, and every move she makes is analyzed, judged, and broadcast? The next phase of this saga promises not only revelations about the proof, but also insight into her resilience, strategy, and ability to navigate one of the most intense media storms in recent history.